to start with a simple example of the neurobiology associated with fight or flight. If any of this seems off, I encourage you to go back and watch last week's live event. It's still up, and it's dealing with the fact that we have a brain that's 100,000 years old. And the point was, why does that matter? Well, it matters because we don't need new ideas or new practices. What we need to do is get good at what works. We already know how human nature is because the philosophers had it mostly right in the last few centuries, and the New Thought era certainly spelled it out well. The difference is that they didn't have the measurement and scanning tools to understand what was really the difference between the subconscious and the conscious mind. And so that part of it requires some clarification, but the essence of it is correct. So if you books like Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, it's still true today. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. He talked about the 6 human needs in the early 1900s and Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the middle of the 20th century. These things are still valid. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we have to do is get good at what works, and we have to understand what works. So I want to use an example of the process of when a person goes into fight or flight. We have to understand that fight or flight, it's an association. It's something that's happening right now is associated with a threat from the past, and as a result, we build up some cortisol. That cortisol prepares us for the adrenaline that's going to flow. And next thing you know, we're at a heightened alert to be able to either run or fight the proverbial Serengeti tiger. Now, this made a lot of sense in a hunter-gatherer environment where what you learn from 0 to 7, which is where most of our conditioning happens, and we're highly susceptible to myelination during that time, which is why those habits get so deeply ingrained. So the threshold for myelination is low and the magnitude of myelination is high. So that's why you have all the conditioning happening from that, or most of it from that 0 to 7. And then the prefrontal cortex from about age 19 to 27, the way I look at it sort of operationalizes all of that. The 20 billion or so neurons that are in the prefrontal cortex were not fully developed until that 19 to 27. And as they develop, they're looking at all the conditioning from life and building the model of the world. Again, that made a lot of sense in a hunter-gatherer environment. Even several hundred years ago in an agricultural environment, it still made sense because the world we were living in at 50 years old was very similar to the world we lived in from 0 to 7. And so the farming techniques and the dealing with the threats and weather and all those things, it still made sense. But today, with the VUCA that's around us, it's constantly changing. Geopolitical events, things, the global things that happen halfway around the world can impact us. All of this creates a situation where we're constantly being thrown into the unfamiliar. And whereas habit is great, how we're wired and set up, it made a lot of sense for the hunter-gatherer. It made a lot of sense during agriculture time. But today, because the unfamiliar is seen as a threat, it's understandable why people are on edge so much. It's like we're being faced with all this uncertainty. As I was saying, things can happen halfway around the world and have an impact on us almost immediately. Certainly, if not a direct impact, it's taking up attention units. And as we give up attention units, we are then primed for fight or flight. Even our posture, even walking around in a defeated posture can prime us for a stress response, and the stress response leads to fight or flight.